Today we're going to talk about the Puritan threat in Elizabethan England. We're going to look at who were the Puritans, what sort of threats did they pose, and how did Elizabeth deal with them. So first off, to understand the Puritan threat, you need to understand a few other things. Elizabeth's religious settlement, the middle way, is what she sets out right at the beginning of her reign, and it's how she tries to navigate the really difficult religious circumstances in her country. So she kind of tries to sit between Protestant and Catholic. You've got the Catholic threat as well. So Elizabeth is threatened from both sides. The Catholic threat comes from things like plots and rebellions, from the recusants, and from people like Mary Queen of Scots, who is a potential heir for Elizabeth. You've also got the increase in Spanish tensions. Spain is a huge Catholic power, and they do spend a lot of time butting heads with England at this time. So we're going to look first of all and just remind ourselves of Elizabeth's religious settlement. First of all, you've got the Act of Supremacy and the Act of Uniformity, both in 1559. She does this really early on. The Act of Supremacy makes her the supreme governor of the church. This is a strict ban on foreign leadership in the English church, so denying Elizabeth's position in the church was considered treason. She re-establishes the break with Rome. She says, no, we are not part of the Catholic Church. We will not be part of them. The clergy, that's the church people, swear an oath to Elizabeth, but she does keep two archbishops, York and Canterbury, and bishops are chosen by Elizabeth. The Act of Uniformity makes Protestantism England's official faith. It sets out rules of religious practice in a revised prayer book. It does retain some Catholic traditions, including the taking of Mass. And it states that everybody has to go to church. Now, she tries to balance here. There is a lot of Protestantism, but there are elements of Catholicism, which you can see in the Act of Uniformity. What I really want you to recognise, though, is that the Catholicism is very ceremonial. It's the frills of it. It's all of the things that actually, they're not that important when it comes to the religion. Protestantism kind of gets the real belief. So who are the Puritans? Because that's who we're looking at today. If you think about religion as a scale in Elizabethan England, you've got Catholics, with the Pope as the head of the church. Protestants, Elizabeth is a Protestant. And then you've got the Puritans who we're looking at today. So they're extreme Protestants. They really hope Elizabeth will remove all elements of Catholicism, and many had returned to England when Elizabeth became queen. So that's who we're going to be looking at today. First of all, they do something called prophesying. It becomes popular in the 1570s, and it involves members of the clergy meeting for prayer and discussion, often criticising Elizabeth's middle way. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Edmund Grindal, encourages these meetings. As the highest position in England in the church, that's quite a big deal. Grindal is suspended when he refuses to ban prophesying after Elizabeth asks him to do that. So the question here, how much of a threat is this? You've got to think about, why might criticism of the church bother Elizabeth? Why must she address that? What is she worried about happening if she allows them to continue criticising her religious settlement? Another thing Puritans do is they create separatist churches. So in 1580, a new separatist church is established, and hopefully the name gives you a hint here. These churches are separate to the Church of England that Elizabeth has established. Robert Brown is one of the leaders. He is arrested, but he is later released. Another one of these churches pops up in 1592, and this time Elizabeth is not so kind, and the leaders are actually arrested and hanged for their crimes. So how much of a threat is this to Elizabeth? A key question to think about here is, would she have allowed Catholics to do the same? How would she feel about separate Catholic churches? And then you can kind of begin to understand why she might not be very keen on separate Puritan churches. The third way they try to protest against Elizabeth is the Puritan choir. So this is in Parliament, and it includes a number of Puritan members of Parliament, Sir Peter Wentworth and Sir Anthony Cope, for example. They try to introduce new laws that favour Puritanism. They try to really lean Elizabeth towards Puritanism and away from her middle way. Other famous Puritans are Sir Robert Dudley and Sir Francis Walsingham. However, Walsingham knows that Puritanism was never really going to succeed, so he doesn't push it much. He makes sure that they are protected, but they do not get a lot of time in Parliament to add these new laws in. Elizabeth's relationship with Parliament is already difficult. The issue of her marriage comes up a lot, so when they try and push Puritan laws, it doesn't really go down very well. So how much of a threat is the Puritan Choir to her middle way? Remember, these people are in the direct power of making laws. However, Elizabeth does have control over them. How does she deal with these Puritans then? In 1583, her new Archbishop John Whitgift introduces rules to crack down on the Puritans. He makes it so there is no unlicensed preaching and enforces attendance at church by imposing recusancy fines, much like our Catholics have at this time. Hundreds are dismissed or imprisoned, and a good example of that we will see in a minute. Dudley and Walsingham do call for tolerance from Elizabeth to try and make her not as harsh on the Puritans. That example I was talking about, Puritan printer John Stubbs, actually has his hand cut off. He wrote a leaflet opposing her marriage to a Catholic, and that was his punishment. So quite a severe punishment for those speaking out against Elizabeth and Catholicism. So key questions to consider here you might want to try answering. Number 1, what is meant by the term Puritan? Number 2, why were they so unhappy with the church under Elizabeth? Number 3, how far were they a threat to Elizabeth? You might want to think about the separate ways they worked with that question. And number 4, who was a greater threat to Elizabeth, Puritans or Catholics, and why do you think that?